Johnson, and this is Focus on Liberia. Hit it! From Cape Mount to Cape Palmer, Mount Nimba to Atlantic Ocean, Obomi Hills to Pocondre, to educate, elevate, and promote. Talk about home affairs, in diaspora, current affairs, reliable information, history, talking about culture, politics, education, entertainment, business, sports, advertisement, articulation. Focus on Liberia. Focus on Liberia. Focus on Liberia.
At Focus on Liberia, we discuss everything Liberia. From education to politics, arts and culture, entertainment, agriculture, history, religion, family, and technology. Focus on Liberia uncovers and showcases the best of Liberia and shows the world the truth about Liberia. We educate, elevate, and promote all things Liberia. We conduct interviews, panel discussions, debates, and more. Tune in to Focus on Liberia on Facebook and YouTube and be a part of the stories that make up the news.
This is Focus on Liberia, and I am Dennis Jar.
And I am Anson Sia, and I'm excited about the edition of our programs here at Focus on Liberia. And you heard it. We are about educating, elevating, and promoting all things Liberia. If you have not seen our educational side yet, today is an opportunity for you. So do us just one favor. Share the broadcast and be part of this education that we have packaged for you to understand what we call state-owned enterprises. They are not only unique to Liberia, it's a global idea intended to make effective the management of institutions that provide services for the people of just about any country. With me to discuss this is our own man, Thomas B. Kanna. He's Focus on Liberia Public Financial Management Practitioner. He will be our chief discussant in this edition. Tom, it's good to have you. How you doing?
I'm doing well. Great to be here.
Yeah, we are here to talk about state-owned enterprises. Many of us have heard that and probably have not put some time in it to see what they're talking about when they say state-owned enterprises, to see that you are our chief discussant to provide some understanding for our audience and the Liberian people. I'm excited about that. I don't know about you. This is your thing.
Yeah. I mean, it's always interesting to discuss things that have a bearing on the economy, So, yeah, they play a role in the economy, not only delivering services, state-owned enterprises also play a role in growing the economy and doing a lot of other things. So it's great to be here to discuss it.
Yep. And so, folks, you heard it there, our topic, the state of state-owned enterprises in Liberia, but we'll take it from the global context. Like I said earlier, this is not unique to Liberia. And so, Tom, let's get started. What are state-owned enterprises, and where did the idea come from? Why do government establish state-owned enterprises?
Thank you, Anthony. I think we'll get straight into it. So, first, they are They are enterprises. So an enterprise is an entity you establish to be able to make profit. So when you have a company, it's an enterprise. So these ones are called state-owned enterprises because they are either wholly owned by the state or they are partially owned by the state. So there are state-owned enterprises that are owned jointly by government as well as private sector entities. There are also state-owned enterprises that are totally owned by the government, and they can be owned by governments at different level. There are state-owned enterprises that are owned by national governments, and then there are state-owned enterprises that are owned by local governments. So even when you go to Liberia's Local Government Act, it gives authority to counties to be able to create their own enterprises.
Okay.
So Sino County, for instance, can create an enterprise to be able to maybe deliver services. Let's say they can create their own enterprise to replicate what water and sewer does at the state level. So state-owned enterprises can be at the national level, they can be at the subnational level. But a broader way to define them is that government has a stake in them. It's either 100% stake or partial stake. That is, they can buy equity, for instance, in a company. But this whole idea started back in the 19th centuries. The UK, France, and other countries really started to nationalize um, economic production processes. So they will have a company, for instance, to manage their railway. They will have a company to manage their electricity grid and all of that. So from the 19th century on to now, we see, like you said initially, they are spread all over the world. Every government has state-owned enterprises. Even here in the US, for instance, you have the postal services. It's a state-owned enterprise. If you go to Great Britain, their enterprises, their railway aviation authority, their railway authority is a state-owned enterprise. So they are spread across different sectors. You can see them in defense. You can see them in the energy sector. Many countries have state-owned enterprises that are in the energy sector or in the oil sector. For instance, you have in Russia, you have Gazprom. It's a state-owned enterprise. There are also a lot in uh, in the transportation sector. You will see state-owned enterprises that deliver services to be able to transport people from one point to the other. You also have them in aviation. So you have many of these airlines that are owned by countries. So you have Kenya Airways, you have uh, uh, Ethiopia Airlines. So
Ethiopia Airlines.
these are enterprises, but they are owned by the state. You also see them a lot in the service delivery sector, in the delivery of water services, delivery of electricity and distribution and transmission. So you see these enterprises that are set up. So broadly, government set up these state-owned enterprises to be able to deliver on economic priorities. Like I said, for instance, on the energy side, on the commercial side with airlines, it's meant for you to travel, but they will be able to get money from there. So they are there to achieve economic priorities of governments. They are also there to help government deliver service delivery priorities. We want people to get water. We want them to move around. We want them to have electricity. So they are established to be able to achieve economic goals, political goals, service delivery goals. Sometimes you see them even in the communication sector. There are telephone companies that are owned by specific countries. So overall, broadly, they are owned by states, either wholly or partially. They are owned at the national level, they are owned at the subnational level, and they are created to be able to help government actually deliver on economic growth, on service delivery responsibilities to be able to run the affairs of a state.
And Tom will get to the legal and regulatory framework of these state-owned enterprises that govern them. But I'm curious also. So this is government establishing these entities, and more like say, well, though the institutions are state-owned, but we want them to run as though they were private businesses. Why?
So generally, there is a thinking that private sector entities are much more efficiently and effectively run as compared to public sector entities because of the bureaucratic nature of governments. Yeah, because a decision making process in a typical bureaucracy is it starts with someone very low level. It has to go all the way up to the minister. Maybe the minister will have to consult the presidency before they come back and respond. So these bureaucratic processes can make it difficult to be able to run a business in the general bureaucracy. So this is why states can often set these state-owned enterprises aside, and they have different governance frameworks that we'll talk about. So because of the efficiency with which they can run, that's why governments can normally remove them from that broader bureaucracy and set their own framework and allow them to operate. So even though they are owned by governments, but they are operating more like private sector entities. The major priorities that they have is to be able to make profit. The non-service delivery ones, they are set up to be able to make profit, or they are set up for national strategic issues like in the energy sector. So because you want them to make these fast decisions that are not tied into the bureaucratic structure of the state, that's why you set them aside. That's why you see countries do them. And like I said, from the 19th century, you had many of the institutions in the government, in governments were centralized. But then on to the end of the 19th century, on to this point in time, there was also this reform that came in, especially when the USSR, that central command structure that it had in terms of national planning did not succeed, or when the USSR broke down. And then there was another trend of reform that came in these state-owned enterprises called privatization. So
Right.
many countries just look at them and say, but they are not profitable. They are tied into government bureaucracy. There's a lot of political influence. So let's just privatize them. So you will see that over the past 20 to 25 years, there has been a lot of privatization that has taken place across the developing world, from Eastern Europe onto countries that were part of the USSR, onto Africa, onto Latin America. So they were initially government and government enterprises. Later on, in some instances, they were completely sold off. Their assets were sold off. Private entities took over them, but yet there are strategic ones, like I said, that governments have need for them, so they are still kept as state-owned enterprises. But to answer your question, the reason why they have these separate structures is to be able to improve their efficiency and effectiveness.
Thank you, Tom. Is it also safe to say that another reason they are set up the way they are and to operate, you mentioned efficiency and effectiveness, keywords there. Is it safe to also say maybe to lower costs on the citizens or the population, like take transportation services, for example? The Monrovia Transport Authority, for example, that's sort of be providing public transportation services in Monrovia, assuming it were effective. That means it will be able to create a balance between commercial transportation options and that of the public. Is that one of the reasons or rationale behind the whole idea?
Yeah, so on the service side,
Mm-hmm.
in many instances, when in some instances when state-owned enterprises are set up on the service side,
Mm-hmm.
the issue of cost is there,
Yeah.
but also the context of that cost is in the sense that if you completely privatize it and only leave it to private markets,
Right.
then they will compete. When they compete because of their efficiency, in some instances, the cost will reduce
Right.
on the private side. I
Right.
mean, generally in markets, you
Right.
want competition, like we have seen with Lone Star and Secom. They come in, they compete. The
Yeah.
price of a SIM card reduced from maybe 100 to now $5. That's competition.
Mm-hmm.
But also when you open these sectors to the market, there are some instances where the price mechanism
Right.
will not allow people who are extremely poor to be able to participate because they don't have money. So the government can establish an institutions like the NTA that
Mm-hmm.
will actually be offering services lower than the market price. So they will come in because they are partially funded by the government. They will come in and put their buses on the street. So if the taxi is charging maybe $200 from EAWA Junction to Morovia, the bus will tell you can get on the bus with all of their limitations, the many stops, but you
Mm-hmm.
can pay maybe $50 to $75 to reach town. So on the service side, they are there to be able to counterbalance
Right.
that competition that is in the private sector, so that citizens who cannot afford,
Mm-hmm.
they can be able to benefit from these services.
Thank you, Tom. Now let's talk about the legal and regulatory frameworks, governing SOE. My question is, what is the legal and regulatory framework governing SOEs in Liberia?
Yeah, so that's a very good question. So before we go to the legal and regulatory framework, let's just give an idea of, in our own context in Liberia,
Right.
what are the institutions that we refer to as state-owned enterprises, right?
Okay.
So, like I said, these are institutions that are established either to provide support to the economy, for us to move ahead with growth, or they're established to be able to deliver services. So, the bigger ones that come to mind, for instance, the Port Authority
Okay.
is an enterprise, but it's owned by the state.
Yeah.
You go to the National Oil Company, that's an energy kind of enterprise, but it's owned by the state. The way it is established, it can actually take on the function of mining its own oil, like the different oil blocks that we have.
Right.
If Nuka has the capacity, Nuka can take on one of these oil blocks and be able to mine it, get the oil, and then it can be able to manufacture fuel and other products and be able to sell it. So Nuka is a state-owned enterprise. Then we go to LPRC. LPRC is a state-owned enterprise. We go to LEC, Liberia Electricity Corporation, is a state-owned enterprise. Liberia Water and Sewer Corporation is a state-owned enterprise. So they are all established either to achieve these economic goals that I spoke about, or to achieve service delivery goals. So there are a lot of them. There are many of them that are state-owned enterprises. So on your question of the legal framework, normally these state-owned enterprises are established by acts of the legislature.
Okay.
So if you go to NOCA, there was an act that was passed to make NOCA the National Oil Company of Liberia. If you go to LWSC, way back, I think it was in the 1960s or 70s that the act was passed to create the LWSC. I think the legal creation of LPRC still has some question marks around it, because I'm not sure LPRC was created by an act of the legislature. I think it was created by an article of incorporation. This is something we can still research. So the broader question of their legal framework is that it has to be a bill that is submitted to the legislature, and then the legislature will pass the bill, and then the entity will be created through that legal instrument that gets submitted to the legislature. In terms of their regulatory framework, because when you establish them, you have to regulate them. Every entity in the government or every sector in the government has its own regulatory body.
Right.
Like if we go to the energy sector, you have the Liberia Energy Regulatory Commission. They are there to regulate the work that LEC is doing. They are there to regulate the work that Floyd Toma and his team are doing in NIMBA. So that the energy sector has its own regulatory sector. Then we even have the I think we have the petroleum regulatory sector. So the work that NOCA is doing is regulated by the Petroleum Regulatory Authority. So in the sector where the state-owned enterprises fall, the entity that is responsible to regulate them on the regulatory side is the Bureau of State Enterprises.
Okay.
So the Bureau of State Enterprises was created under the regime of former President Doe. It is that entity that is really meant to regulate these state-owned enterprises. How are they doing their planning? Do they have strategic plans? How are they managing their finances so that they can be able to deliver value for money? Because let's not forget, they are established, but they are still owned by us as a state. So that means they have to be managed well. And then they make profit because they are enterprises. And then when they make profits, they either reinvest the profit in their operation, or they remit some of that profit to us through the national budget process to be able to deliver other broader services in the economy that they are not delivering on. So legally, they have to be established by an act. And then on the regulatory side, the Bureau of State Enterprises is the one meant to actually regulate them to make sure that they are operating well. But the Bureau of State Enterprise has not been that active. It only started coming up in the past, I think, 5 or 6 or 7 years. So I don't really know whether they have really developed their institutional framework to be able to fully regulate these state-owned enterprises. Because when it comes to regulation, normally when the sector or the entity you need to regulate is sometimes older than you, it becomes a problem. For them to even submit to your regulatory authority can be a little bit of a problem. But in summary, legal, they need to be established by law, and then regulation, they need to submit to the Bureau of State Enterprises to be able to regulate them. And you can see the name of it. It's called the Bureau of State Enterprises.
That's
So
correct.
it's regulating state-owned enterprises.
Thank you, Tom. So now let's talk about their functions and mandates, right? So what are their key functions and mandates, or the key function and mandates of the major SOE in Liberia, as briefly as you can?
Yeah, so I mean, I mentioned some of them. So every time that the law gets passed,
Mhm.
it clarify their functions, it clarify their mandates, and then it also clarifies their governance structure, how they will be governed, because they are not in the broader bureaucracy of the government.
Yeah.
It clarifies how they are. So in many instances, their name can state what their functions are. You see the National Oil Company of Liberia. So it means they are the company of Liberia to be able to work in our oil sector. Like I said initially, they can function as a company, like a private sector company. They can take oil block, they can mine it, they can sell the oil. LPRC was created to be able to, just the name, Liberia Petroleum Refinery Company.
Mhm.
So they should ideally have a refinery in Liberia where they can bring petroleum products to be able to refine it into gas
Mhm.
and be able to sell it on the local market. But what FPRC mostly does is that they have tanks. So you bring the products and they can store it for you,
Right.
and then you can pay to them for that storage.
Yeah.
So they don't have a refinery right now. Then, so we've spoken about the NOCA, we've spoken about LPRC, the port. We know what the port does. Everything you are bringing into the country, you pass it through the port, there are fees that you pay. If you can't go for it immediately after you get it to the port, they will store it for you, and then you will pay additional charges for keeping your goods there. We also have we haven't spoken about it. We have the National Social Security and Welfare Corporation. So NASCOP is also like an enterprise because everyone that is working for the government, there's a social security tax that you pay as part of the taxes that you pay in addition to income tax and other taxes. That goes to NASCOP, and it is kept there to be able to um, get you pension services when you retire in the future. But because the cycle of life is such that you pay all of that money for 25 years when you work for the government of Liberia. You only retire before you have access to it. So that means NASCOP has a lot of money that is like idle. Because like you and Sony, you're working for 25 years, you're not going to access that money. So it's
No.
almost like idle money for NASCOP until you can retire, and then they start to pay you back your pension benefit. So because they have that volume of money, they can go out and invest. So like the LRA building that is at ELWA Junction is owned by NASCOP. So NASCOP, I think they were doing some investment in the cocoa sector. So that's their role to be able to invest that money that is with them, make additional profit on it, so that when you retire tomorrow, they can be able to pay your pension. LWSC, Liberia Water and Sewage, the name tells us what their functions are. They are responsible to provide water to us, whatever mechanism they use, whether they want to build a tank or whether they will use pipe borne, and then sewage. I mean, to manage the sewage system, to build a system in such a way that it doesn't affect the communities and societies where the pipes are moving along. So, I mean, I might not be able to go through all of them, but in
Right.
some way, what I'm saying is that their mandates and functions are spelled out in the laws that create them. And then those laws would then become the governing or the legal instrument that gave them the authority to say, this is your mandate, and you go ahead and do this or do that.
So, Tom, just to be clear, can we do a little bit of separation from the SOE, the public cooperation, from other entities of government, probably that are more so on the regulatory side? I know the Rubber International Airport might be a public corporation, and you can correct me on that. So, how do we distinguish the SOE from the other institutions of government that are more on the regulatory side? For example, the Central Bank of Liberia. Where were it for, please?
See, the central banks they are state owned, but
Mm-hmm.
they normally don't fall in this in the broader category of SOEs. I mean, when you go through the nuances of it, it's
Mm-hmm.
almost like it's an enterprise, but the central bank is more like a regulatory entity. It's
That's right.
regulating the financial sector.
Yeah.
So we didn't create it so much for profit making. We
Mm-hmm.
created it to be able to regulate the financial sector so that we can have one, price stability,
Mm-hmm.
and two, we can be able to for it to be able to contribute to growth.
Mm-hmm.
So normally central banks are not defined or don't fall in the category of state-owned enterprises. So it's
Yeah.
just it's created to be able to deliver on our monetary policy issues. When we want to print money, that's the institution that we use. When inflation is going up, we turn to the central bank to be able to reduce it. So it's not generally defined as a state-owned enterprise. The Liberia Airport, the RIA itself,
Mm-hmm.
it should be a state-owned enterprise
Okay.
because the RIA itself, you fly in there, there are fees that you pay. But the Liberia Airport Regulatory Authority,
Authority. Yeah.
yeah, then becomes the regulated entity. But the airport itself is the airport, the ports, they are all enterprises.
Yeah.
We create them to be able to make money.
Thank you, Tom. So just to be clear, are there other entities that we can be for sure that are regulatory entities and not state enterprises? Just to be clear, I know you
Yes,
mentioned the. Yeah, go ahead.
so they like I mentioned the airport authority, that's a regulatory authority. I mentioned the Energy Regulatory Commission,
Mm-hmm.
so that's a regulatory authority. I mentioned the Petroleum
Yeah.
Regulatory, yeah.
Yeah.
Now the
What's for LTA?
LTA, yes, LTA is a regulatory authority. LTA is there to regulate the telecommunication sector,
Right.
right? So no,
Mm-hmm.
the way to distinguish them, the way to distinguish them is that which one is created to make profit.
Okay.
Those that are created to make profit or to deliver services,
Mm-hmm.
they are SOEs. The ones that are regulatory, LTA, for instance, is not intended, is the sole purpose of LTA is not to make profit for itself.
Right.
It's to make sure that better telecommunication services are delivered to the people, that
Mm-hmm.
people are not colluding to be able to increase the prices, to extract too much from us as citizens, consumer protection, all of those things. So they are there to regulate the sector. So they are not like LPRC
Mm-hmm.
that is created with the sole intent of helping to make profit or to deliver services. So LTA only regulates the sector. This is why LTA does not have SIM card by itself.
Mm-hmm.
You can go and buy a SIM card and cancel it and say we want to buy it $2, we sell it for $3, then we make profit out of it.
Exactly.
So no. But then in the telecommunication sector, there's a state-owned enterprise that we have. I think it used to be called Lipteco,
Yeah.
but they've changed the name now to LRB. I'm forgetting. There's a new telecom state-owned enterprise that we have in Liberia. I think LIB Cell or something.
Yeah. I think I heard about that, but there's not much I know. So, Tom, let's talk about whether or not these state-owned enterprises are fulfilling the responsibility given to them in Liberia. Let's come home specifically. Are they living up to the expectation? Are they fulfilling their responsibilities?
So this is kind of a very good question that will require a lot of diving into diving into their individual operations
Mhm.
and their individual functions
Respon-
and how they are delivering on the mandate.
Responsibilities. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So it's easy to pull out. Maybe you can pull out the law that created NOCA, that created LPRC, but there is not much information on their operations.
Okay.
So to independently assess their financial positions on whether they are failing or whether they are making progress, it's extremely difficult because their operations are in many instances not transparently or the information on them is not out there in the public, even though
Mhm.
they are owned by the state. But as
Mhm.
an individual citizen like myself, except I do a lot of digging, you cannot have information on how they are operating. So in many instances, our assessment of them is, are they delivering the services that they are meant to deliver? So if we just go on looking at their service delivery functions for those in the service delivery sector to be able to assess them, then it's out the jury is out there in the public. I mean, if you see all of the sewage systems that are broken in Monrovia, on Randall Street, on Center Street, and other places, then the question is LWSC really delivering on their mandate? Are they really performing to keep Monrovia as a clean environment, and to keep it as an environment that is not contributing to ill health? So on the seaway side, we can see all of the challenges that are there, although I have to mention that they are doing their best to be able to resolve this. I've listened to the managing director that some of the difficulties that they are faced with is that people have built on the alley, people have built over those pipes that are there. So for them to even get to it to repair them, it becomes a problem. So on the service delivery side, it's easy to see. LPRSC, yes, you can say they have their tanks. Every time you have gas on the market, it means LPRSC is doing what they are doing, even though they are not the only player. They have other private entities that are bringing it. When gas prices are going up globally, they come up with these schedules to be able to state that this is the price, even though in some instances people don't follow them. So anecdotal evidence we can be able to show. Noka, when they were established initially, we saw a lot of work they did with sending Liberians out of the country to go and do master in the energy in gas sector, petroleum economics, petroleum accounting, and all of that. But then years down, we hear that it broke down. But even with the issue that okay, Nuka broke down, where is the evidence that we can rely on? We don't really have information out there in the public to be able to see. So, I mean, anecdotally, we can say that some of them are doing what they can do. Some of them are also failing. We have heard a couple of years ago, LWSC, for instance, could not even pay her own staff. The national government had to go in to be able to take on that role and responsibility. And this is something important that I have to mention. Because these entities are uh, kind of autonomous, they are not subjected to the bureaucracy, and they are established to be able to make profit. So they should actually not be a burden on the national budget. They should be able to operate themselves, make profit, like I said initially, and reinvest in their business plans that they have, and also remit money to the national budget. But if you are not able to make profit yourself, how can you be able to support the national government? So every time they fail, because they are a state enterprise, and this is the risks about them, because every time they fail, the government has to go and build them out. So it's like we take tax money from other priorities to go and build them out. LPR, LEC, we have heard all of the noise that has been there. Are
Yeah.
they paying their bills to Abrico since they connected to the West Africa power pool lines? Is electricity coming on time? Or when it gets crowded, then the electricity goes. So, I mean, to me, I would say that the jury is out there on actually their performance. What I can speak to is their financial viabilities. But in terms of performance, I think everyone, when they perform or they don't perform, it has a direct impact on us as citizens. Because when current goes, we know that it has gone. When water does not come, we know that LWSC has a problem. So on their performance, I could say it's a mix. Sometimes they do some little good things, and then eventually at a certain point in time, they are almost like breaking down. Then the state has to go in there to be able to support them.
And Tom, sometimes another way to know or another indicator that proves that a business is viable if living up to a responsibility is looking at growth. For example, I'm not saying in all cases, right? But let's look at growth, looking at the SOE in Liberia. APRC, for example, do we know whether they have added another storage facility besides the one we've had over the years to say that, all right, there's growth going on here. Now that they have more facility, it might lead to more profitability and so on and so forth. So let's look at growth. How have they been doing in terms of growth?
I mean, in terms of growth, I don't see a lot of growth taking place in the with these state enterprises. So if I go to LWSC, for instance, you will see that every time you listen to them, You hear, okay, there is water in Buchanan. It's actually a development project,
Mhm.
maybe a USAID or African Development Bank coming with a program to help them. So
Right.
as an entity itself, the LWSC, I don't think they have had a lot of growth over the past couple of years. Yes, to your question on LPRC, I think quite recently they said they broke ground for building a new tank. But all of that is just in that little fence around around where they are operating. They have had this vision of creating inland or storage tanks,
Mhm.
that they wanted to create an inland storage tank in Nimba and maybe in the southeast. But that is since we all became adults. We've never seen it happen. So I don't really see them growing and expanding a lot. But that way the growth and expansion will come with really developing strategic plans that will help them to move forward and to be able to grow. And this is where I think the boards that are established to be able to govern these state-owned enterprises, and that's one thing we have to mention, because they are not
Yeah.
part of the bureaucracy, they
Mhm.
often have boards, and those boards are set up to be able to set up the growth trajectory of
Mhm.
these institutions, and then to supervise the work of the management team to see how they move on from there. So if you are sitting on the LPRC board for now, ask yourself 5 years from now, where do we want the LPRC to be? You have to define it. Do they have strategic plans? Do they have investment plans? Do they do cost benefit analysis for their investments that they do? Because that's public money that they're using. So I think in terms of growth, I have been really seeing a lot of uh, growth that has taken place. And I have also have not seen a lot of um, investments that they are doing. You know, I spoke about NASCOP earlier. You see them doing a lot of investment, but you also look at NASCOP in other countries. They have a lot of different investments that they do across the country. So
And Tom, we will get to the boards, the managers, their compensation fees and reporting. We'll get to that. But I think it's important that we drill on the growth a little bit. Maybe we can talk
so
about two more. Let's look at the Rabat International Airport, for example. I have been in the airline industry for over 12 years. So you have an airport, there are gates, the
mhm,
gates that people go through to get on the plane. So
yeah,
when you see additional gate or gates being built, that means there is sufficient growth. That means that airport is generating more money. So it's increasing its capacity to attract more funding, more airlines to come to it and able to make more money, even hire more people.
yeah,
The terminal we have now, my understanding is the Chinese give about $53 million. That's why we have it. Had it not been, we'll be where we were even before the war. So, and then for example, let's look at the National Port Authority you're talking about. I know of the port in Maryland, is Dortmund. I know about the port in Greenville, Sano County. I live in those two counties. Those two ports are Dortmund. The one right here, Buchanan. I'm not sure how we're operating. So even if you're not increasing in terms of growth, increasing the capacity, how well are they even maintaining the facility they have in the first place in terms of effectiveness?
yeah. This is a very important thing, because
Mhm.
also when we discuss growth, it cannot just be geographic expansion, right?
Right.
Growth can take place within the very location where you are. So
Exactly.
the airline for the airport, for instance,
Mhm.
okay, let's agree the new terminal that was built, that was growth,
Mhm.
that was physical capital growth.
Right.
Because you remember many years ago when we used to go to Liberia, that belt that used to bring the bears, that tile.
My man, 2013, I went there, I almost shed tears.
You
Go
know,
ahead.
so at
Mhm.
least again, I mean, with the new terminal, we can see that. I mean, that's an added infrastructure, even though
Mhm.
it's very small
Right.
compared to other countries that we have. But
Mhm.
we've also seen across the region, we have also seen countries building new airports, right? I
Ghana,
think
for example,
Ghana,
fast food.
yeah, I think
Mhm.
Sierra Leone also recently built a new
Yes,
airport. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, Sierra Leone
yeah.
did. That's
So
correct.
even
Senegal, for example, also did.
Yeah, Senegal also did. So
Mhm.
even though the building of the terminal with excavators that are there, so now when coroner can, it will not work and all of that, the air conditioner might not be working, but the building of that structure is a sign of growth. But my
Right.
point I was making earlier is that the growth can also be, like you said, from the different airlines that are coming.
Right.
How many airlines do we have flying in Liberia in 2020? If they were full, And then today we have 6, 7, 8. That means the airport is growing, the traffic is increasing. People are traveling frequently. There are new airlines that are coming. Like we hear the current team now is saying they are going to bring in other new airlines and all of that. So that can be seen as growth. In the
Right.
context of the port, for instance, do we have how many ships do we have docking at the port? How much time is it taking for them to be able to clear up whatever goods that the ship is bringing? How much time is it taking for people to clear their containers from the port? So there
Right.
can also be growth in terms of improvement in processes and procedures.
Process. Yeah.
How easy is it to get your container from that port? Do you have to go through bureaucratic tips and be able to enter 24 offices before you clear your port? Or you introduce technology to make sure that people can stay at home and go through all of the paperwork and then they can just come and get their stuff out. So growth can be seen in different contexts, either geographic expansion or improvement in your processes, or the other angle of growth can be even your returns on
The returns.
investment. You go
Yeah.
and invest in like the new thing that LPRC is building. If it does not bring return, then it means they are not growing because it's like
Or
an
maybe innovation with new technology to make the process easier.
easier, like I said. Yeah, so I mean that growth can also be internal. It can also be an expansion, like you said initially. It's over 20 years since the Civil War ended, and we have always seen everybody say, "Okay, we have the port in Buchanan, we have the port in Greenville, we have the port in Maryland." I think in Maryland there is a ship that sank in that port, and it has been there for the past 20, 15 years. We've never been able to get it out. So if we look at growth of the NPA in that kind of context, then it means the growth is not actually taking place. And I think this is one angle through which people are saying, let's make the other posts to be autonomous. Grand Bassa is a port is autonomous by ACF, Sino is autonomous, and Maryland is autonomous. Maybe that can bring competition among them, and
Right.
that way they can grow rather than putting all of them under the NPA. So I think on the issue of growth, we've seen some growth, but we've not seen them massively grow.
Thank you, Tom. Let's get to the issue of reporting. These entities that are state-owned, they are for the public. In that, to bring it to the Liberian context, they are for the Liberian people. So they should be making reports, or their report should be accessible to the citizens to know how they're doing. Do we have that? Can I, for example, go on APRC website and see their quarter report to see how they're doing financially? As citizens, since this is a public institution, do we need to know the fees they pay the bills, even the managers, including the staff, how much they have paid? Do we have that, or do we? Is it necessary that we have that, or what do we have? How it is set up?
Like I said initially, I mean transparency around these state-owned enterprises is extremely limited. I think that's it also goes to the way they are established because they are outside the bureaucratic sector, the normal bureaucracy. They are created. The president does appointment, and you can see that they are even different in the sense that the leaders that are heading these state-owned enterprises don't even go for confirmation. So when you are appointed as head of LPRC today, you just go there tomorrow morning, you start working. The only one that goes for confirmation, which was a 2016 amendment that they did of the act that created them, is LWSC. But today there is even now some advocacy that why should you treat LPRC differently? If others are not going for confirmation, why should they go for confirmation? So the normal practice is that they do their reports and their reports go directly to the president. So quite recently, if you've been following, you hear the LPRC say we went to the president, we submitted our quarterly report. LWSC has also said that quarter one, they submitted a report that are clear, their goals that are set up. So on the side of the public, it's not very clear. But this is also part of a bigger problem we have in the country where you have government entities that don't even have websites. So I don't know whether LWSC has a website by itself. I don't know whether LPRC, I said you see them, they maybe the heads of these entities posting on Facebook. I'm not sure they have dedicated websites where they can really publish these reports for people to be able to see how they are performing. So on the side of the public, it's extremely difficult, like I said, from the initial stage. But in terms of the legal proceeding and the regulatory proceeding, they should be submitting these reports to the presidency, and they should also be submitting the reports to the Bureau of State Enterprises, because it is the reports that they use to be able to regulate them. I also do know that on the public financial management side, the Ministry of Finance has been doing a lot of work to be able to improve the financial reporting of these state-owned enterprises. I think a couple of years ago, there's a unit that was created in the Ministry of Finance, which is called the SOE unit.
Right.
So the purpose of that unit is to be able to gather information, those reports that come from the state-owned enterprises, so that the Ministry of Finance can have an idea of how their financial management systems are being run, whether they are close to, I mean, defaulting on the loans that they take, because there are entities that they can take their own loans. They can take loans to be able to invest. So that SOE entity that is at the Ministry of Finance is there to really help them channel all their reports to the Ministry of Finance, because these SOEs have advantages and they have disadvantages. Like I said earlier, they are meant to make profit, but if they don't run effectively, they break down. And when they break down, the government will have to bail them out. And if you are not aware that a state-owned enterprise is going to break down tomorrow, or it will default on a loan tomorrow, and then they default before they run to the Ministry of Finance to say, hey, we have a problem. At that point in time, the Ministry of Finance might not have any resource set aside to be able to bail you out, because they have no idea how you are running. So that's how they need to submit their reports to the Ministry of Finance. But what we do know is that the reports primarily go to the president. It's also channeled to the state-owned enterprises, and some information is fed to the Ministry of Finance. But these are all highly tight places to just be able to get information out of them. So on the side of the public, not much information. So you can just sit as a citizen and see whether LPRC is profitable or NOCA is profitable. But if you are in these reporting channels, you can be able to have an idea of how they are doing.
So, Tom, if we are to pinpoint the main challenges for the SOE that probably making them ineffective and probably not performing to our expectation, not being profitable and not generating significant revenue for the people of Liberia, what you think those key challenges will be, and how you think they can get around them to solve them?
One key challenge that SOEs globally have is the issue of governance. Because even though they are separated from the bigger bureaucracy, but they are still state-owned, and that makes them to be subservient to the state. So there are instances where you will have the state bureaucracy still be fed into the SOEs, because the head of the SOEs are appointed by the president, and then the board members are appointed by the president. So if you don't have boards that are set up that first have technical expertise that entity is in, they might not be able to provide effective leadership to drive that SOE forward. And then if you also look at the board composition of the SOEs, you'll find out that some of the SOE boards are even chaired by the traditional ministries. So let's say LBDI, for instance. I think LBDI, we didn't mention LBDI, but LBDI is a state-owned enterprise. State-owned enterprises can also be banks. Many countries have state banks. So LPRC is a state-owned enterprise, but we don't have 100% equity in LBDI. So the Minister of Finance is the chair of LBDI because it's in the financial sector. So one challenge is the issue of how they are structured and how they are staffed. So if you don't adequately staff them with people who have an idea on how to run them, and you don't have board members that have the ability to be able to set long-term goals and then push the entity to be able to achieve those goals, it can be a problem. Also, SOEs broadly across different countries have problem with even their staffing, because like I said, they are still part of the state. So there are instances where people get employed in the SOEs based on maybe recommendations. Say, okay, you take this number of persons. And you will realize that after a couple of years, they become overstaffed and they can't lay staff off because they stay part of the political system. So they become overly staffed. They are spending a lot of money on paying for the operation of the offices and paying their staff, and then they stop becoming profitable. So on the issue of challenges, there are often challenges with governance. There are also challenges with their legal regime, the way they were established. For instance, I understand the law for it was passed like 20, 25 years ago, many years ago. It has not been reformed, even though things are changing now, but their laws uh, might not be current enough to be able to give them that flexibility to run the way they want to run. I just listened to the head of LWS a couple of weeks ago, and he said the way their law was passed, it does not even define what are the rules and responsibilities of the managing director and the deputy managing director. So they have to define that in practice because it's not defined in law. So the challenges might be governance, the challenges might be legal, the challenges might be financial management, and then the other challenges might be even staff capacity. Because if you start in these certain own enterprises, you have to have people that have skills to be able to do investment analysis. What is it that we should invest in? If you don't have those kind of people, I mean, you just continue running the day to day, but you will not be able to grow. So there are a lot of challenges that they have. Sometimes you have very reform-minded people that go into these entities, they want to change them, but they are caught in the political uh, structure of how we govern as a country. Sometimes broader governance inefficiencies also come back to affect them as state-owned enterprises. Like I was saying, most of the ministries don't have active website, so the SOEs will also maybe not have active website. We are not really adopting technology to be able to move processes forward. That could also be a weakness in state-owned enterprises. So there are a lot of challenges that they have.
Tom, I want to ask a little more on the composition of the boards, who are being placed on the board. Do you think Liberia is an exception the way it's been done? Do we have it being done in other places? Because it's like somebody is placed on a board of APRC, the person has no idea about what APRC does. The person is just a board member and show up to meeting. How you think the selection or the appointment of board should be done so that the board can be able to provide the kind of oversight that the corporation need to succeed?
I think broader in not only Liberia, in other countries, you have those kind of situations where people, because like I said, the SOEs are still part of the bigger bureaucracy. So because the appointments are done by the president. So some people that might not get ministerial position, there was no way we could appoint you as a minister or deputy minister. We appoint you to go and serve on one board. But what I see other countries doing is that in some instances they appoint people who are not in the broader government bureaucracy, who are technocrats themselves. Maybe they might be in the private sector, but they are independent people. So when they are making their decisions on the board, they are not tied down by, okay, if I make this decision, what is going to happen? Because, say for instance, you are a minister, and then you are on a specific board. The decision that you take on that board, you might be constrained for the fact that you are already in the bigger bureaucracy. But if you, Anthony, you're sitting down here, you're working in the aviation sector, and then they put you on the RIA board, you can take decision. Nobody is going to remove you from your position that you are in. So even though generally across the globe we see that people get appointed based on their connection in the broader public sector, but other countries try as much as possible to put independent people, people who are in the private sector, maybe people who are in civil society that are not in the broader bureaucracy, and people who really, like I said initially, have deep technical background in the sector. Because if you have technical background, you will be able to know, for instance, how should an aviation industry, state-owned enterprise be run, because you have an idea of how it is working, maybe in other countries, or your
Right.
professional experience. So I think this is what we need to do more as a country. If you go through the boards, you have some people who are not government folks, they are on the boards, but sometimes there are also people who are placed there that have no technical background in the sector. They might not have even the level of education. Because let's take this now. You take, for instance, a lawyer and put the person over Noka, somebody who has a law degree, somebody who is a geophysicist, or somebody who has a degree in mining engineering. You are the president of Noka. The vice president has this master degree. And then you put somebody over that person at the level of the bull, who clearly does not even understand what these people are saying when they meet in meeting. So what would you expect that board member to do? Because the board is is there to supervise the work of the operation team, the work of the management team. So if the person on the board does not have the capacity to manage the management team, then of course that person cannot support the growth of that entity, and they cannot regulate or supervise what the management team is doing. So in summary, what I'm saying is that when these appointments are being done, they need to be critically looked at before these boards are constituted.
And Tom, that brings me to my final point. Because of time, I think we might find time to discuss that again. Let's talk about the corporate governance of these SOE. I hear the argument that, look, the mechanism in place for corporate governance, nothing wrong with it, except that it's not effective. Where do you stand?
I mean, corporate governance is a major limitation with SOEs, and more so in Liberia. Like I was saying earlier, do they have policies on their book? Because when the boards are established, the boards are established to make sure that all of the rules and regulations that are needed to be put in place for those organizations to run effectively and efficiently, that they are put in place. For instance, uh, do they have rules and regulations on how they can do employment? Because you just sit in the morning, you hear somebody say, "Oh, I had a director now to this state-owned enterprise." How were you recruited? Was it advertised? Was it a competitive process? Or they can just appoint, the same way the president got appointment power. They can just appoint someone that is not in the entity. So their corporate governance, in terms of transparency, in terms of accountability, in terms of financial management, is often a challenge. And because the corporate governance structure is not in place, or even when the rules and regulations are in place, they don't follow them. This is why in many instances they fail. We just wake up in the morning and say this other SOEs has failed, and the government will have to go and build it out. And globally, whether it's the development agencies, they do a lot of work. Even the World Bank, the IMF, they do a lot of work to make sure that corporate governance in these SOEs are improved. Because like I said earlier, they are linked to the state. So every time they fail, that burden comes to us as a government. And the only way they will be run well is to really improve their corporate governance. How do they make decisions? When they meet, the meeting minutes, are they documented? Are decisions made based on people's instinct, or they are made based on the rules that are on the book? Are they reversing their corporate governance structures? So like an entity like I was talking about, the MDA saying that the roles and responsibilities of my two deputies are not even defined. So how do you even work when it's not defined what you can do? So routinely, we have to make sure that these entities, that they have structures in place that can be able to promote good corporate governance. That's the only way they can give us return for which we establish them. But if they have very bad corporate governance systems in place, then of course they will not be able to deliver, whether it's service, they will not be able to deliver on the purpose of creating it to make money and remit some of the money to the national government through the national budget, so that we can deliver services much more broadly across the country. So corporate governance is very, very key. Just like private entities, they have these very strong corporate governance or structures that they have in place on against corruption, against nepotism, against this and that. That is exactly how these state-owned enterprises are meant to be governed. But unfortunately, because they are in the broader sphere of the public sector, sometimes there are governance weaknesses that undercut their performance.
And so, Tom, what would be your recommendations when it comes to accountability and transparency and effectiveness for the public corporations?
So I think broader with governance is not something that you do and complete. It's to routinely go back to see what are the laws that created these entities. Are the laws still relevant? What other countries do is that they have time frame through which they assess all of the state-owned enterprises, and we are very far from some of these countries. But in Germany, for instance, they do it biannually. They review all of them to see this entity that was created, this SOE that was created in 1960, is it still relevant? Should it still be functioning? If that question is no, they'll dissolve it. They move ahead. Do we need to create a new one? We'll create it. So I think what we need to do is to routinely assess their performance and be able to see if they have limitations on the legal side that we can be able to improve. If they have limitations on the corporate governance side, we can be able to improve on these things, but not to just let them to just move on for the fact that we created them, let them just exist. We created them. If they are no longer meeting the purpose for which we created them, we can dissolve them or we can reform them. So I think this is a continuous kind of process that we have to keep doing to see how they can really be impactful. So I would just recommend that we continue to review their performance, and we also like to say to those people who head these institutions, the more transparent you are, the more you let people know how you are operating, the more you let people into your space, the more people can be able to contribute in terms of ideas, in terms of systems strengthening that can help you to be able to move you forward. But if you just sit there and you think that, okay, I have been appointed here, I have the authority to do whatever I can do, and you are just in a little bit of a corner and nobody knows what's happening to you, you're not doing well for the country. So I think, I mean, in the broader bureaucracy, just as we are reviewing the existence of all the other ministries, agencies, we continue to review the existence of these state-owned enterprises and see what limitations are there. It could be on the process side, it could be on the legal side, it could be on the technical side, to be able to address them as we move forward.
Thank you, Tom. And for me, my recommendation would be that since the institutions are public, owned by the people of Liberia, they should give a quarterly report, and those quarterly reports should be accessible to the public. I think it will lead to a competition in terms of productivity, because if PRC is doing well, the National Port Authority might want to do well. So I think transparency is key. That is my recommendation. So, folks, this is how we'll come to the end of this edition. Yeah, go ahead, Tom.
I mean, I agree to that. And to me, it's not only the SOEs, it should be all the ministries, agencies, and commissions, every government entity.
Thank you.
At the end of every quarter, publish your report. Let the public see what you are happening. That way, we are also able to see the progress that we are making as a country. But if we don't know what Ministry of Education is doing for this whole year, so we're all celebrating, oh, Ministry of Education, they gave them 111 million. But at the end of the year, we'll be scratching our heads. So what did the Ministry of Education do this year?
Yeah.
So the financial reports that go to the Ministry of Finance is only on the financial side. But how about the program side?
Exactly.
What did you really achieve on the performance side? You are presenting a report that goes into the fiscal outturn to say, okay, this is what I received and all of that. But what did you achieve with that money? It's difficult for us to see. But if those reports are published, all of these ministries and agencies, SOEs and everything, in the age of internet, they all have websites and people can go and download these reports. It's easy, for instance, when you were asking me earlier, what is the financial health of these entities? I can easily go on the website, download their reports and see how much profit they made this year, how much was reinvested, and how much did they give to the government. Then you can be able to know how they are performing. But for the fact that our government entities don't report to us as a public, and then they expect us to often be filing a request for information because we have a freedom of information law. Because if we all say we are going to get up in the morning and file these requests, the whole government will just be overwhelmed with responding to us. Because I will file a request, I want to know the quarterly performance of LPRC, with NOCA, with Ministry of everybody, 107 ministry and agency. We send all the requests. They will spend all their time responding to us. But if at the end of every quarter, or let's say at the end of the fiscal year, you do a report and publish it on your website to say this is what we achieved this year with the funds that we received. But we all as a country know that we are making progress. And because we are now reporting, sometimes we are actually making progress. But nobody knows that we are making progress because the reports are not out there in the public. Nobody knows what you are doing.
And Tom, that is key on the reporting side, because that's how we know that that particular head of that agency is doing well. There's progress being made, right? Now we can measure productivity. Then even the president who has the appointing power now, if he's not being political, will be making decision to maintain somebody or move them to another place based on productivity, because the report says that, oh, since this person been over there, the revenue generation of NPA has increased by say $10 million. So what I can send him to the airport, maybe he will increase it. That way, overall, lead to government generation of revenue. Now we can increase post salary, or we can put more money in education. So that is key, and I hope that these institutions will take key note of that.
Yeah, and what will also be helped is to see the progress in terms of time series. So, for instance, if the NPA has been reporting since 2006, you can be able to see not only the progress that is made in 1 year, but let's say over the past 10 years.
Right.
Where was the NPA in 2006 and where is the NPA now?
Now,
those reports can help you to be able to track that trend. Is it going up or is it going down?
And I had people make business decision or leadership decision, based on the trend.
Right. So right now, the government is looking for people to invest in a sign-up post. They're looking for people to invest in a beginner port. But how can you sit in let's say in India, you are an investor. Where is the port that they are talking about?
Yeah.
What's the size of it? What's the capacity? How many ships are going to this port in a year? Where are you going to find that information?
Nowhere.
So you have to go to Monrovia, they put you on the car, they carry you to Greenfield, they go point their finger, they say, oh, that they put here.
And they put here. And then the investor is confused and the investor leaves and never returns because there's no information, there's no history of that port, how it has been doing, that will give that person reason to say, okay, now that they have been doing this way, when I made the necessary investment, I'll be able to get, investment on my, money on my investment. Thank you, Tom, and thank you so very much, folks who followed the discussion, and those who will join later. We want to say thank you. They was meant for us to have an understanding of state-owned enterprises in Liberia. We will now close the broadcast with our song that says, "We are all Liberians." Enjoy the song, and bye-bye.
We are Liberians.